Welcome to Season 2 of the Ambitious Broker Podcast, the real estate industry's #1 show covering the most important insights and principles you need to succeed in your career. This show is brought to you by Escrow Technologies, committed to delivering an uncompromised escrow experience since 1983. Visit escrowtech.net for more information. Please welcome the host of the Ambitious Broker Podcast, your real estate industry mentor and coach, Roger Hance.
On this podcast, we don't only speak with realtors, we speak with all real estate professionals to inspire, educate, and motivate those that are thinking about a career in real estate. And today is a very interesting topic because with me, I have Roger Hance. He is the CEO of Escrow Technologies. He's been in real estate for a few decades, and he was the top producing agent, and at one point ran the 5th largest brokerage in the 90s. And I'm excited to talk to him specifically around real estate technology and what's kind of been going on, and why is it so goddamn hard to implement technology in this industry? Well, first off, Roger, thanks for coming on.
Nice to be here. Nice to be with you. Looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, I mean, we've been kind of, we've been trying to get this on the calendar for the last 45 days, and I feel like, my schedule's been all over the place with the newborn, but we got it done.
Stop having babies.
Yeah. I gave a little bit of bio on yourself, but tell us real quick, quick little history about, how you got into real estate, but more importantly, what is Escrow Technologies and what do you really solve on? Focus on today?
In my case, I got into real estate right out of college, and a friend of mine got me into it. I was very fortunate, did very well right away, became the top income producer for what amounted to Coldwell Banker. It was a company that Coldwell Banker owned in Southern California. And after about 5 years, I started my own company. We built that to about 14 offices, 700 salespeople on the way. And during that journey is where we did a lot of things that you would probably have me talk about today, because we really started the whole computer stuff in real estate and technology back in as early as 1983, I believe. And we started building all kinds of software for just real estate brokerage and management, accounting. And then ultimately we ended up building the first CRM system that was ever used in real estate. And so when you talk about implementing technologies, that was a very interesting experience to talk about a CRM before anyone knew about computers. And implementing stuff was kind of interesting. So we went through that. We had a lot of interesting marketing stuff in those days. We got some patent on equipment that we did. Then we built an escrow processing system as well. And then in 1984 or 85 roughly is when we converted to a complete technology-based escrow system. And it all ran off of a mainframe computer, very expensive to do, but a very, interesting education along the way. And then that led into some other things we did with, you mentioned startup, and I was involved with a bunch of startups and won a music company startup that we did. And then ultimately after selling my real estate company, we've helped and consulted in coaching real estate agents, owners and managers of companies. I've consulted in starting a dozen or more real estate companies and escrow companies and a few mortgage companies and so forth. So pretty much anywhere, someone wants to hear me say something, I'm going to be there.
Love it. I noticed that you were saying we. Is there a group that a team that you have consistently worked with throughout the years, or?
No, other than the people that worked as developers for me.
Gotcha. Yeah. So now, you've kind of said you'd built some escrow process systems, and it's completely tech-based escrow process. Is that what Escrow Technologies is today?
Yeah, that's actually how we got the name. We started out as we had a different name in the beginning. And once we set up our first, escrow process, it was computerized. And it sounds funny saying these things today, because it's such commonplace. But it was really, earth-shattering back in those days. And it's funny to compare what is earth-shattering today and know what that's going to be how dull and boring that's going to be in 10 years, you know. But we would, as simple things like, as example, the only printers that would work in those days were, we got right on the very leading edge of laser printers. So they only had one drawer, which was 8.5 by 11. So what was an institution that was all legal size paper, we had reduced to 8.5 by 11 paper, so it could print through. So just some interesting obstacles like that along the way. Yeah. But I've noticed that they're parallel in every business. You know, you're running across those in what you do, and but it's really what makes it fun. Yeah. So it makes you feel alive. You get some challenges, you know, you get your butt kicked a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, make sure you're still living.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, is it safe for me to say that your company takes the escrow process start to end without any human labor, or
no.
Okay, so
no,
we're a human component.
In fact, in the early days, you know, I always laugh because people called, you know, the stuff paperless. You know, we're going paperless, and you know, I think we've discovered more paper because of paperless, you know, systems that have happened along the way. But no, escrow, like I think the real estate brokerage business, is always going to really need people involved. There's, you know, and unless if we get way down the line where you know, blockchain and a lot of this, you know, new systems that can be secured and have a different type of authority along the way, then maybe in those days we can see people fade. But between now and then, I don't think so.
Yeah, gotcha. So in your process, you know, which parts of the system have you automated with escrow? And then I'm going to get to a comment about escrow, and I want to ask you if it's true or not.
Okay. Well, we started by automating the documentation process, yeah. And then, you know, automating ultimately how we deliver, you know, documents back and forth, how we receive documents, how we could acknowledge receipt or that things have been sent through the system. Sharing status and documents now out to the internet, so that people can, you know, access and communicate, you know, through online systems and, you know, things like that.
Gotcha. I had a like a kind of like a mentor, if you were not a mentor, but kind of like a unofficially appointed mentor when I was like building my first business, and his company was an escrow company, and he said something that stood out to me, and I don't know if it's true, but I want to ask you if it's true. And he said, Dalip, in real estate, you have the real estate agent, you have the loan officer, you have escrow. He said, all these guys are doing so much work, but you know what? In escrow, we're the ones taking the money to the bank, and we're kind of behind the desk. And so I always just thought that was really funny because the way he said it, it was Generations Escrow. If you're familiar with them here in Orange County, Barry is his name.
I've met Janice in that group. Yes.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. So yeah. Barry, that's what he said to me. And I said, that's so funny. And is that true in escrow? Because, you know, we have a lot of people in that are wanting to become real estate agents that are listening to this podcast. But very much, if you're like, you know, process driven, attention to detail, like escrow could be a very great path, but a great, you know, economically speaking, very advantageous if you're looking to make some good money in escrow.
You know, you're talking broad strokes like that. I think escrow is like any business. You know, if you run it well, you're dedicated to it. You can do very well at it. It's also a business that most people fail at, and it's a very, very competitive business now because of the way real estate brokerage companies have evolved. A lot of them depend on those ancillary services to be able to continue to do their business. But what I will tell you this, because you have a real estate agent audience, is that I had a real estate company forever and managed. What I can tell you for sure is that if you have a very good escrow officer, that if I was entering the real estate business today as an agent, I would tell you that the person I would want to listen to first and foremost in transactions is a very good escrow officer. And the reason I say that's because they have a perspective on a real estate transaction that literally nobody else has.
What's that?
As an example, you take you take one of my really good escrow officers. I don't have any escrow officers with less than 20 years experience in the business. And I have a handful that have over 30 years experience in the business. They do as many as 50 sell transactions a month, any one of them. And if you take a salesperson that does 50 sales in a year as a real estate agent, they're in the top 1% of the business.
That's right.
These people are engaged in 30 to 50 a month. So next step, they actually get to see and talk to every single person in the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So the selling agent talks to the escrow officer, the listing agent talks to the buyer, talks to the escrow officer, the lenders talk to the escrow officer. Everybody is talking to the escrow officer. She probably, if she's smart, will have the clearest true perception of the dynamics in every escrow. And then the next thing is that it brings you a level of transactional experience that just almost no salesperson can have, because you just don't do that much business. They do enough. They're in the middle of enough transactions that they can tell you what lenders' trends are. They can tell you the latest thing that Bank of America is doing, or what Chase is doing, or what Loan Depot, or they're in the middle of these deals all the time, and they see sales that fall out. They see what lenders say and do, and it's just they're being in the middle of transactions. They're very smart people, who the good ones are very good. And if you're a real estate agent and you want to learn about a transaction, go find a really good real estate escrow officer and just tap into her, because she really knows the truth. And you hear a lot of the way they talk, way buyers and sellers talk to each other, not the way they talk to the escrow officer. You have, in due respect to all the agents out there, you have, listing and selling agents that are just not telling the whole truth or the whole story, and the escrow officers got most of the story. So it's, since you do have new agents that are listening to you, that would be my advice.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think you're kind of right. Like the escrow officer is where everyone's going to be the truest, most vulnerable, and really come. Yeah. Like that's the person that's like, that they have clear visibility on. That makes a lot of sense to me. What about, are more states going to become escrow states, or is it the other way around, that more states are, letting go of escrow and becoming more, how do you say, like lawyer states? Like, how is that changing?
My guess is that's probably pretty static.
Okay.
I suspect that, there aren't a lot that have escrow as a separate entity. Even in California, 90% of escrow service in California is south of Santa Barbara. In the Northern California, really will typically be doing that through title companies or, another kind of service. So, but it's also hard to imagine that would change a lot. I'm not sure what it would take to change it. I certainly don't believe that you'll get more escrow companies where there are not currently escrow, because you're talking about a problem that doesn't need to get solved.
Yeah.
If you don't have an escrow, you've got someone who's doing the equivalent service.
Right.
So there's not a real driving need for it, I think.
Yeah. But I noticed like half the states are like, it's like, I feel like it's a 50-50, half are escrow, half are lawyer states.
Yeah, I think less than half are escrow.
Less than half for escrow. Yeah. That's what I was trying to get a pulse on. Yeah. So talk to me about more like technology, I guess, there's a lot of innovation being done in this space. I see so many more like, tech startups, mainly around like SaaS products, around agents can become more part of the buyer or the customer journey. There's like a big stickiness around like how agents can like, what is the term they use? Own the customer for life. Like that's like the theme that like everyone is preaching about. Like, how do you not like forget about them after a transaction? And you were talking about CRMs, and I feel like, there's a new CRM. It's like a Starbucks coffee shop out on the internet. Like there's a new CRM brand, like everywhere you stop.
Well, that's right. And it's like, I tell people it's like Excel, I can go on and do some basic work in Excel, but 90% of the stuff I can't do.
Right.
Just not that into it. And I think that's the way most real estate agents are about technology in general. So you get these differentiating features between CRMs are features that most agents are never going to learn anyway.
Yeah.
But I've seen agents who go from one system to the next, keep waiting for the system who does everything exactly the way they want it done. And my advice to those people is go write your own software, and then
that's an
maintain your own
undertaking.
software, right? And then it'll be exactly what you want for a while, and then you'll have to change it again. So, but I'll tell you what is interesting about what you said, and that is that I had an agent come to me probably 3-4 years ago that's been around the business for a long time. And he says, Roger, is it funny to you that we had a larger percentage of people that were using our CRM system in the 80s than you do today?
Can you repeat that? The larger amount of people?
We had a larger percentage of real estate agents in our company that used the CRM system.
Oh.
So to us, it would have probably been around 85% of the people actively used and when I say active, I mean who accessed it daily.
And you mean when you ran the real estate brokerage, you're saying your agent's utilization level of the CRM?
When I wrote the first CRM system, which we talked about, I did so in 1983.
Yeah. Yep.
And we implemented it throughout our company. And even though it was a ton of work to get people to understand the value of computers, I also said clients for life. Don't let these clients leave you. You've earned your trust. You've demonstrated your trust and your value, and don't let them forget it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the essence of what a CRM is all about. And so, we got that going. And so the agent who was in the company in those days said, we had such a large percentage of people. And he goes, every real estate office I see today, it's like almost nobody uses a CRM, yet there's all these different CRM systems, Yeah. And so there's a much smaller percentage of agents who engage with CRMs today than there was in our company in those days.
Yeah.
And it was a very simple answer to the question. And it was, two parts. One was, there was no other option.
That was what I was about to say. Monopoly.
There was no option. Two is that, like an MLS system for an agent, when you sit at your desk or any software, when you get to a point in a software program where you get stumped, you need to get over that hump to continue to go deeper. And if you don't have a way to get over that hump right now, chances are you won't go back to it. Mm-hmm. If you get chased because I can't get over this hump now. So in our case, a person could stick their head up over the cubicle and say, hey, how do you put that client's, whatever, right, their checklist in or their, whatever. How do you do that? And someone in the room would have an answer. Mm-hmm. If you're in a real estate office today and there's actually people in the office today, then you would say, hey, how do you do this in Top Producer? How do you do this in Lone Wolf? And, there won't be a person within 4 miles that's using those systems, so there'll be no answer back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that those are the two main factors today that's affected. The other thing probably is there's fewer people seriously committed to real estate today than there were, back in those days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot. Yeah. It's definitely been, from what I understand, like distilled down, like, every third house has a real estate agent license. But more so, there's kind of like a stigma with these brokerages that, I speak to a lot of agents on this podcast and they tell me, they're like, I don't want to use a CRM that's provided by my brokerage because they own the data. I want to be in control. And the problem happens is that they're like, well, I don't want to give it to them, but then they need the self initiation of themselves to be like, I'm going to adopt the CRM to my guidelines. But that's like you're focused on like whatever you want. So now it becomes a second priority, and then they never adopt anything.
Right.
But they're like, I don't want my brokerage to have it because this is my book of business. And you know
I'll tell you an interesting story about how silly that is. Most of those people will do far less production because they just don't want to, they would rather bite off their nose and put the data there. I was like, in the meantime, they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're using Google, they're spreading their data about themselves, personal, all over the planet. The guys who own these real estate companies, most companies don't really have a proprietary system.
Yeah.
So they don't have access to that anyway. If you have a top producer, maybe has access to that. And could they sell data to someone? Yeah, maybe they could. But again, the whole idea is to have a tool for you to use to be able to manage a relationship with a greater number of people than you can without it.
Yep.
And I think it's a fear factor that doesn't belong there. But if I go back to our early days, we had to deal with our people that because we actually did have access to that data, and we had people express that fear to us. So we just simply said, listen, I don't have time to barely do what I do anyway, and chasing your clients is certainly something we're not going to do. We just don't have the time. So, but when you leave, if you do, we'll give you the data, and we'll let you watch us delete all the data. And there's got to be a certain amount of credibility to believe that you're actually going to do that.
Yeah.
But we did say, if you leave the business, we will keep the data.
Yeah.
And the reason is because, one, they didn't pay for any of it. I mean, I wrote the check for everything.
Yeah.
So in that respect, we had a certain amount of right to some of this stuff.
That's right.
And if they left the company, then in that case, we would maybe distribute to other people. So we would have nights where people would do cold calling. And so the managers would sometimes go back into the database, pull out stuff from agents who had left the business maybe a year before or 2 years before, and have a list of names. The managers would give this to agents doing cold calling. And there was literally never a night of cold calling those numbers where one of the agents did not say, it's funny, I just hung up with this person and they told me they just closed escrow on a purchase last week.
No.
Or just a month ago or 2 months ago. So you sit back and these poor people who left the business because they weren't doing enough sales. Well, we have evidence a year later that had you been making these phone calls, you might still be in the business today because you'd have gotten that deal instead of some other agent. So I'm obviously a big believer in the tool, the CRM tool.
Oh yeah, 100%. But this way also, like, agents are moving from brokerage to brokerage, more often, I think, maybe than back then. So much competition.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to get into some technology stuff while I have some time with you. And one of my questions for you is, you said you started in like 1983, I think is when you said the CRM. And one of my questions is like, with mortgages, escrow, real estate, why is it all the MLSs are so different? I guess from your like tech background, what do you think it would take to really create like a standardized system across these different functions of real estate?
MLS only?
Well, I just, I speak to like, CRMLS before versus like Austin MLS, and everything is so different, Roger, like their whole system, the way their data communicates. And then you think about the mortgages, every state, every product is so different, and it's ran differently by county, by state, and so forth. Just curious, I imagine you thought we would be further along when it comes to like automation in technology in the real estate process. This is an open-ended question. I just would love to get your thoughts on where do you think it's headed, and what do you think it would take to get like a more systemized process when it comes to using technology to automate some of these things?
I tell you, it's a really good question. It's a better question than it's a better question than you think it is that you ask right there. I was actually the first person to ever aggregate multiple MLS databases. And so I have a lot of experience with it. And then later on, I was a vice chair of an organization in Los Angeles called Carrots, which took a step to aggregate data from MLSs. Currently, they use a thing called data share, which is just a different methodology of doing it. And you don't have a centralized place to do it. So I've had a lot of experience with that. And I'm a huge technology fan, but I also know that to do technology just for the sake of doing technology, I don't know that gets you to a positive end someplace. Mm-hmm. So like what you're doing, I mean, you have to have, I think your goals have to be pretty clear cut about what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to say, let's find the easiest way to run a multiple listing service, it would seem logical that there would be one and all the data would go in one and you'd have the same user interface for everybody. And wouldn't that be simple? The problem is that you have legacy issues and you have MLSs that are stretched out all over the United States, and they've been in business for years. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of them, a lot of associations of realtors are actually owners or part owners, and their mere existence sometimes is dependent upon revenue from MLS. So there's just so much stuff to work out there. Then the second part of it is that you take an area like Orange County where you're located. Mm-hmm. You just tippy-toe up 405 about 50 miles into Los Angeles or San Fernando Valley, and you got a whole different way of describing real estate. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to have an option about some feature about a house, you could have 3 different ways of describing it just in the 3 areas that we passed driving up the 405 freeway. Now, then when you encompass the whole state and then the whole country, and every time you want to enter data, your drop-down list would have 100 options. And so it can get to be very clunky. Yeah. Then there's a practical aspect of it. And by the way, there's a lot of people who've been trying to do a nationwide MLS system. California has been trying for years. CAR tried to do a statewide MLS that they actually gave up on, sold it to CRMLS, and let them try it, gave them an endorsement to do a statewide MLS. And that was probably 15 years ago. And there's just no chance that that's going to happen in any amount of time, because you have certain areas. Santa Barbara as an example, say Big Bear Lake Arrowhead area, you take Palmdale, Lancaster, those areas don't even want to share data. Yeah. Yeah. So you think, well, gee, that sounds really selfish. That sounds really, really kind of ugly. Yeah. Until you say this. Well, how much sense does it make? Do we have 3 more minutes to do this? Yes, we do. Yeah. All right. So walk through this scenario with me. All right. Real estate industry, California. There's 200,000 members of CAR, roughly. Mm-hmm. So you have 200,000 agents, of which 70% sell 3 or fewer homes per year. Okay. So now you have 70% of real estate agents who will now travel sometimes long distances to do a sale. Take the San Fernando Valley. If you go back, say 20 years ago, you would have, of all the sales made in the San Fernando Valley, 95% would be made by agents who were in the valley. Mm-hmm. And that was true everywhere. Mm-hmm. They started sharing data, and as they did, the agents from areas started migrating to do transactions. Mm-hmm. Okay. Today, only about half the business in the San Fernando Valley is done by brokers who have offices in the San Fernando Valley. Mm-hmm. So now you're talking about half of this transactions being done by people that are traveling all over the place. So now you're saying, I have salespeople that are doing 1 or 2 sales a year, and they're traveling across the state to do business where they know absolutely nothing about what they're doing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, what does this do for the level of professionalism that you think? And I've been in this argument 100 times with people in the associations because, they like they're going to tell me I don't understand technology. No, I understand technology. I also understand if it doesn't do a good job of sewing, I don't need that sewing machine.
Right.
And if it's gonna make clothes that people don't want to wear, then that's not good either. So we have a situation now. If you go back to the next step here, if you go back to 2008, 2009, we had, as you're probably aware, a big market crash.
Yep.
It was because of what was going on with lending, subprime lending, and so forth. But what happened in those days were the legislators decided to, legislators decided they would blame a lot of this crash and these bad loans on the idea that appraisers were appraising properties and their relationship was too close to the real estate mortgage broker or the real estate agent. So they created these separate entities now that all appraisers must go to. So follow me on this.
Yep.
So now most appraisers are going to do at least one a week.
Yeah.
So you got the low end of the appraising industry is doing 50 appraisals a year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're doing hundreds of appraisals a year in the appraisal industry. The real estate industry, 70% aren't doing 3 a year. A year.
Yep.
Not a week, a year.
Yep.
Okay. So when they created these appraisal companies, they in the first early couple years, 2-3 years, they had appraisers that they would assign, say, from Long Beach to come up to the San Fernando Valley and appraise a property.
Right.
The real estate industry blew their brains out. They were so upset because they claimed that they aren't qualified to appraise these properties because you aren't from around this area.
Yeah.
But somehow the people that are 50 appraisers a year or more aren't qualified to cross these big boundaries.
Yeah.
But a real estate agent who does 3 sales a year somehow is greatly qualified to go do that. So the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. and it's a horrible thing that has happened in real estate because like it or not, real estate is a local business. And I don't care what anybody says, clients are served better by people who are local. I know that they'll cut my throat for saying that, but it's an absolute fact. And there's a lot of people who feel the same way I do about it. I'm not the lone wolf out there. And evidence is that clients are less well served by agents that are traveling great distances to try to provide service.
Yep.
So collectively, those are the things that I believe are obstacles to getting a simpler MLS system. Now, someone like yourself in the service that you provide, you're having to jump from MLS system to MLS system because you're trying to verify property values and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not an agent. I just need the data. And I'm like, well, no, what blew my mind the other day, so I'm creating a script that, first off, Roger, that was really insightful. I appreciate it. We're trying to create some scripts on, because we do some underwriting, on our side to verify debt and equity. And so I'm writing some scripts on, reading prelims and, some of them are systemized or they're kind of, some of them are just, well, when you get one from First American, they all kind of read the same and I can, pull certain data and I can have an understanding on how much debt is actually on this property, under whose name, what's the APN. I can come up with some sort of analysis digitally. But what blows my mind is everyone's prelim is just different, all different variations. Can we just have one, just simple one prelim? Right. So those are the things I'm just why is this so?
Yeah, you're an example of a worst case example of all this diversity. I understand that. I do. Terminology is so different, and I think there'll probably be a lot of. There could be a time when that changes. I'm a big believer in blockchain as a technology now. I don't know where it's going exactly, and I don't think it's going to be overnight. I've been involved with consulting with some companies that are deep into that right now, and everyone's trying to find an entry point. How do you enter this? Because, if I had a system that was blockchain formatted that goes back 50 years, this thing that you want would be very simple to do.
So simple. So simple. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is you convert all that data and try to get it in some sort of a, blockchain format, or because there's this need to be able to authenticate every transaction and all. It's just a nightmare to think of that. So, but is there another way to jump into it so that maybe an answer would be a new housing track?
Mm-hmm.
Where your entry point is a single piece of property that we know is owned, but it's going to be subdivided. And we will say then from this point on, we will blockchain this whole title process from now until forever. And then over time, you might evolve into a fully established system, someplace.
There's a company by the name of Crostea, if I'm pronouncing that right. Crostea. Yeah. Anyhow, smart gal, San Francisco based. She started it. She also was invested just like us, like in the NAR Reach program. And she's kind of really focused around that and blockchain and title, but a lot of, I think, cool. It's all about the use case, and everything. I'm always brought him back when they did film. Remember, film didn't have sound, but they had theaters everywhere, and so you had like these. Then you started producing films that had sound. So then they had to go back and update all the theaters with sound to read the latest films. And so you kind of have that, like kind of what you just expressed. It's like, do you go forward or do you have to go backward, or like where's the entry point?
I think that if technology is going to be used properly, and I used to always say, if you have a typewriter and you enter with an electric typewriter, you type like you always did, just faster.
That's right.
Right? You can back up and do whatever. But the true gain in technology well developed is going to be when I'm not typing faster, I'm approaching the development of documents totally differently.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a totally different process. And I think, as example, today's word processors are an example of throwing a typewriter away and saying, let's create documents differently. Let's cut and paste. Let's do word check. Let's do, grammar check. Let's do all these things that you can do. Let's save as and then do a different doc. Let's line strike. All this stuff. I mean, this is a totally different way to develop documents today.
Yeah.
And that's the way you use technology is let's get a new workflow. And you're probably aware of the story about how Apple developed the Macintosh.
That's right.
And they said without a new way to manufacture, there would not have been a Mac, the short version of it. And because they were able to do things differently and more efficiently. And I think that if we start thinking in those terms, how do you change the workflow with technology? And we don't think about how do we eliminate a human being or how do we eliminate a person. I think we're going to go further in advancing with technologies because it's almost adversarial today. Some of the people, because I've been to pitches with startups on new technology, and it's really interesting how many of them, by the way, it was about $45 billion in the last 5 years that was introduced to come, disrupt the real estate industry. And when I've been to these presentations, somewhere in the middle of it all is, basically the real estate agents pay too much. They're lazy, they're unorganized. We can do this better. We can do it cheaper, / we can eliminate them. And so they don't quite understand the beast yet.
Yeah, it's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you hopping on and coming and spending time. If anybody wants to reach out to you or learn more about Escrow technologies, where would they go?
I'm glad to talk to anybody who wants to talk. Probably my email address, which is my name, ROGERHANCE at MSN.com, is probably the best way to reach me.
Amazing.
Roger Hance at MSN.com.
Roger Hance at MSN.com. And if you made it so far, thank you for tuning in with Real Talk with Realtors. Roger, thank you.
Thank you.